Okay, everyone, welcome. This is today's webinar is about aviation careers and the future, and what is held in what the aviation industry is going to look like, why you may or may not want to join, and to kind of help us with that conversation, we've invited Eric Crump back. Eric is the director at Polk State, their aerospace program, and is a good friend of mine and a great guy, and knows his stuff really well about on the aviation industry side, and has given talks like this a lot. So I'm really looking forward to it. So Eric, go ahead and join us here, and let's get started. Hi, Eric.
Hola, thanks for having me back.
Yeah. So just as a programming note, Eric's gonna give his talk, and I'll interject where appropriate. But if you could hold your questions until the end, we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. The presentation is going to run probably 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll get into the Q&A session at the end. You can type your question into the question panel if you'd like, and then we'll go ahead and answer it once the presentation is done. So with that, Eric, well, actually, we have a poll. We have a question we want to do. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and the question is, what aviation career path are you interested in pursuing? So go ahead and click on the answer that best fits what you're thinking about, and we'll go ahead and give it a couple minutes to let people vote. All right. So we have about a third of the vote in. I'd like to give it a few more seconds just to see if we can get a little more distribution. It's pretty clear cut right now, Eric, which category most people are falling into. Okay.
They all want to be educators, right? Everybody?
Yeah, they all want to be educators. Yep. All right.
So did I. So that was exactly why I got into aviation.
Right. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and I'm going to close this poll. It's been open for a minute, and we'll move on. So the answer to that poll that we saw was about 2/3 of everybody on the webinar wants to be a pilot, and the other third wants to be in education. And those were the only two responses we got. So pilots and educators, that sounds interesting. All right, so Eric, take off. You got it.
Sure. So first of all, it's always really cool to get to do a webinar. You just stop lying to people and tell them we're friends. We're besties, Josh, besties.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's cool to be back, and this is one of my favorite topics ever. I understand from our last webinar, it's not just a live audience, but it's also kind of getting recorded and shared and used elsewhere, which I think is really cool. So no matter when or where you're watching this, aviation careers is the right idea for you. And so I've given this talk to industry people. I've given it to middle school and high school students. I've given it to a bunch of college students as well. And the flavor changes a little bit with each take, but the starting point is always the same. And I've been to lots of these talks too, and maybe you have too, where everybody goes straight to pilot and mechanic job demand. Like this is how many hundreds of thousands of people we're going to need over the next 20 years, and that is a perfectly fine thing. That's a great. It's great to start with numbers, I guess, in some instances, and wow people with the demand and all that stuff. I don't do that though. I start with culture. Because not that I've done this for a super long time, I'm not nearly as old as Josh, but in the short amount of time that I have done this and coached other people along the way, the one thing that is common, no matter which field of aviation you want to work in, is the belief that you are part of a team. And so we're going to start there. We're going to talk about culture first, then we will actually get into some careers. We're not going to spend the whole time just talking about commercial airline pilot. We'll actually spend a very little amount of time talking about that. I want to talk about all the different options that exist for you. I want to talk about how you get to that career through education and training opportunities, and also sort of end on, where are we headed? What's next for our industry? And really, unlike our last chat, Josh, where it was sort of me and you talking the entire time, I wanted to sort of throw some ideas at you all and then really save half or so of our time together for questions, and more like a discussion really than just Q&A. But that's where I wanted to end it, and I want that to be sort of the focus of what we're doing, because I'm assuming that you're here because you're interested in an aviation career. Maybe not, you already have one. Maybe you want to know more about them. So I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. So that's enough of agenda stuff. Let's actually get rolling. The first thing we have to talk about, like I said before, is the idea of culture in aviation. You're not going to find a professional aviation job where your first on-the-job training day, whatever that looks like, if it's new hire training for a pilot, orientation for mechanics, dispatchers, air traffic controllers, the first day, I guarantee you, in any professional aviation organization is going to be culture. You have to learn the company's safety management system practices. You have to learn how each division of the company works with one another. And everybody, I think, at least for me, and again, I came to aviation with a deep love for it without any real connections to the industry other than one really good mentor early on in my youth. So I didn't really know a lot about the industry, about how it works. And so I went to college. I think I said this last time we got together. I went to college to be an airline pilot because I assumed that was the only other job. If you didn't fly for the military, clearly you were an airline pilot, having no idea how many different opportunities were out there. The thing that has come back to me in every job in aviation I've had, including now running a college program, maybe even more so, is the importance of acceptance of responsibility, acceptance of accountability, and team culture. And so I would take all those words and lump them together and call them professionalism. And you can't start flight training at Polk State College without going through basic indoctrination with us. And we're going to spend an entire day, I know that sounds really exciting, an entire day talking about safety culture. We're going to talk about operations practices, not just what we do, but why we do it and how we all work together. At Polk State, we have what we call a crew member mindset. And what that means is everybody's a member of the same crew. We all have different jobs, we have different functions, but we're all in the same team trying to accomplish the same goal. Josh, I mean, it might be interesting if you want to talk about, Redbird. Most people think of Redbird primarily as a simulator manufacturer. I mean, I did when I first got to know the company. And then you get to find out, if you're on this webinar, you know that the Redbird's way more than just a bunch of mechanics and geeks huddled over simulator software in a warehouse somewhere, because you have to be. You cannot approach one side of the aviation industry and think that you're going to be successful at it. One of the common things, one of my early mentors told me this, pilots seem to all have an ego problem. Not me and Josh, we're the most humble people we know. But other than us, pilots get a reputation of having an ego problem. And it comes from all of that responsibility and accountability, right? Part 91.3. When I'm the pilot in command, I'm the sole responsibility and outcome for the flight at hand, right? It's all on me. So because of that, I get this inflated sense of self. Here's the cool thing. When you get into professional aviation, you look at the commercial airline cockpit, or you got two pilots up there, and everybody's, ooh, the pilots, right? Well, for every two of them in the front, it takes 100 people in the system to make them able to do their job. So really, in the system of aviation, the pilot is the minority population. It takes so many more people to make that work, and more importantly, to make it work safely. And so before we can talk about careers, the first thing we have to talk about is the mindset we approach the career with. Yes, everybody wants to make six figures and have free travel benefits, all of that. That's awesome. All of that's great, and that comes down the road. But you're never going to get to that place if you haven't adopted a safety mindset. And I don't mean you do it because the company tells you you have to do it, but you do it because you believe it is actually critical for you to be able to do your job and do it well. Anything to add, Josh? Or?
No, I think you covered it well. It's important to recognize the breadth of opportunities, and I'm sure we'll get into that. And aviation encompasses a lot of different roles, and all of it. Like you said, we have a large responsibility that everyone in the supply chain, in the industry, bears some of the burden of, to make safe products, to provide safe services to the flying public and those that get on the airplane with us. So
How good are you at repairing your own airplanes, Josh?
I'm not. Zero good.
I joke around that if you ever see me walking around an airplane with a wrench, you should probably call the sanitarium. I've probably escaped, and somebody needs to come pick me up. I am a professional breaker of airplanes, not so much a fixer. If it weren't for my wife and IKEA directions, I don't think I would be able to assemble IKEA furniture. So, it's assembly maintenance. That's just not my thing. It's never been my thing. And I grew up in a family of people who, fixed cars and, were in like boats and all that kind of stuff. Like I get what an engine is. I get how it works. But the idea of fixing an airplane if it broke is beyond me. So it's great. I'm a pilot. I can fly a lot of different airplanes. I can fly in pretty much any airspace. I can come in and out of the country. I got a lot of experience doing that. But if I go to start the airplane and the battery's dead, the airplane's not going to move, right? Because it's a system. And so more so than just doing the job and doing it well and doing it safely, it's understanding that in aviation careers, it's about all the other careers too. Because none of us, if I didn't break the airplane, the maintenance guy wouldn't have a job to fix it, right? If I didn't use the National Airspace System, the air traffic controller wouldn't need to come to work to make sure I got to my destination safely. If I show up for my commercial airline flight, I'm taking a 777 across the ocean with a bunch of people and nobody's there to load the bags, we're not going to leave. And to some extent, I think we think about service jobs in aviation as though they're some kind of lowly whatever. If you talk to an airline crew, they'll tell you, look, you got to have a good relationship with your ramp agents. You got to be able to communicate. You've got to have you fly airplanes and they load airplanes, but neither one of you have a job without the other one. It's not going to work. And so I think that's the first thing we have to bring to aviation careers is the right mindset, the attitude of teamwork, and a desire to do it the right way because we believe it's important to do it the right way. Back in the 20s and 30s, airplanes didn't have checklists, as an example. You just got in the airplane and you flew it. Now, in all fairness, the airplane had one system and it was the engine, right? So the airplane was vastly less complicated. But as we started adding more and more systems, as we got into the pre-war and the war years in the 30s and 40s, I mean, pilots were dying in training all the time. I mean, it was a daily occurrence. I'm not saying that we don't have accidents and there aren't things that happen that are beyond our control today. You see it in the paper. It's unfortunate. But it's nothing like every day, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people died in training. But that's what used to happen. And it was because everybody approached their job in aviation as a single operator, right? I'm just the pilot. So I just get in the airplane and fly it. Well, do you know when it was in maintenance last? Do you know why it was in maintenance? Do you know what they did to it? Do you understand what the maintainer does to the airplane when it goes in? When the maintainer signs off the logbook, do you understand what that means? Have you ever gone into the shop and watched maintenance perform their job? I'm telling you what, if you haven't, you should. When I was actually actively instructing all the time, it's easier now because we operate a flight training program, so it's very easy to do that. But even in independent instruction, I would require my students, before I would sign them off for the private check ride, I would require them to go to our maintenance facility and watch maintenance performed. So that they understood when I write down a squawk on a piece of paper and say, this is wrong with the airplane, what happens to that from the time I write it to the time it goes into maintenance, it comes back out, and I fly it again, because you have to understand where you are in that supply chain. And with that, if it's okay, let's go ahead and segue into the career discussion. So if you have some questions about that, by all means, please type them in throughout, and I promise I'll shut up soon, and we'll get to questions. Josh is smiling because he knows when I say I'm going to shut up soon, that's probably never true. Not true at all. Joey's laughing too. She's just on mute. So when we talk about careers, obviously, a large majority of our population came here thinking about being a pilot, which is awesome. I'm a pilot. Josh is a pilot. I mean, I'm a better pilot, but Josh is a pilot also. And I enjoy this one. You got your digs last time, so it's my turn this time.
Yeah, this is fun.
You seem like you're enjoying yourself. So people think pilot, and that's fine. I talk to a lot of students who come in who are interested in a career in professional aviation in flight. And one of the first things I ask them is, so what do you want to do in aviation? I say, I want to be a pilot. I say, awesome. But what do you want to do in aviation? They look at me kind of funny. And I said, saying you want to be a pilot is a lot like saying you want to be a doctor. Right? There's a lot of different kinds of doctors. There's a lot of different kinds of lawyers that practice all kinds of different law. There are doctors who actually don't see patients. You go through med school, you do all that, you get your medical license, and maybe you work as a researcher or a pharmacologist or whatever. So you're still a doctor, you're a medical professional, but you don't, see people and give them antibiotics for their sinus infection. So being a pilot is a lot like that. There are so many different kinds of pilot. And I said before, my first dream was being an Air Force pilot. Well, tall, colorblind, terrible vision. That wasn't going to happen. Okay, so airline pilot, I guess, is the only other option. When I got to college, and again, I came from a family that knew nothing about professional aviation. I get to college and realize, wow, there's so many different kinds of pilot. Now, I said in the last webinar we did that I fell in love with the idea of corporate aviation. It really spoke to me, spoke to my entrepreneurial spirit, spoke to my family's background, and it was the perfect fit for me at the time. I also tell people when they ask about aviation careers that I'm currently enjoying my 14th job in aviation. And that's usually when the parents look at me like, maybe we shouldn't come to this program. I wasn't fired from any of them. I wasn't let go. I've never been furloughed. There's not many pilots that work professionally that can say that. I've never been laid off or let go from one. It's just, I kept finding other cool things I wanted to do. If you had told 18-year-old Eric, who went to college, that he was going to run a college program, he would have laughed in your face, because that wasn't even on Eric's radar. I didn't even know that job existed. Okay. When we talk about pilots, the best answer, by the way, I've ever had to that question is a young woman who came in who had already started, maybe she already had a private instrument. She already knew something about aviation. So when I said, what do you want to do? She said, I want to be a pilot. I said, okay, so what kind of pilot do you want to be? My dream is to get my seaplane rating and fly otters on floats in the Greek Isles. That's what I want to do. I'm like, that is incredibly specific. And when you get that job, if you could mention my name, I will gladly come over and hang out with you. And today I'm exceedingly proud of her. Her name's Janessa Duffy. She's currently the chief pilot for Icon, and runs all of their training operations for the amphibious Icon seaplane sport plane. It's an awesome aircraft, and I keep telling her I want to fly it. She keeps telling me that will happen, and both of us are really busy. But at some point I'm going to do that. So she's not in the Greek Isles yet, but she has an awesome job. And I don't think when she came to our program that it was on the horizon for her that she was going to be a chief pilot and a chief instructor for a light sport seaplane, amphibious, whatever, all the different things that the Icon is. It's like a personal watercraft with wings. And so that just shows you, like, even somebody with a very specific, I know exactly what I want to do, then massages and finds a way to do something that is even more awesome. The day I called my mom and told her I wasn't going to be a commercial airline pilot, she cried. She cried, but it's all you've ever wanted to do, Eric. said, but I found something even better than that, Mom. I found something that's going to be even more awesome. It's more what I want to do. That's just in piloting, right? So let's say that uh, the idea of flight intrigues you, but flying the airplane's not really for you. Most people don't even know what the flight dispatcher is, but the flight dispatcher works in Part 121 and 135, scheduled and non-scheduled passenger and cargo carrying operations. They're basically the non-flying pilot. Okay, so if we still had a third crew member, which we don't in most transport category airplanes, that's sort of what the dispatcher does. So a lot of people think they're the air traffic controller. They're not. They work for your company and they manage multiple flights at a time, but they're the ones that are doing your flight planning, your weight planning, they're doing your fuel planning for you. They're making sure that wherever if you need to divert because of weather or a medical emergency, that adequate services exist at the airport you're going to go to. They are the captain's direct link to the ground. And actually, in a Part 121 scheduled, air carrier operation, the captain and the dispatcher share operational control of that flight. It's not the captain making all the decisions by him or herself. They share that operational control with their dispatcher. So here's a job. If you, let's say, for example, the medical certificate just won't work for you. You've got a disqualifying medical condition, but you love the idea of flight. You want to work for an airline. You still want to have ride benefits, and you want to only work 4 days a week. Flight dispatch is your job, and senior dispatchers are easily making it the 6 figures. Now, I do want to know when we get to the end, how many of you now want to be a dispatcher who didn't even know that dispatch was a job when we started. But that's just an example. Air traffic control is another example. I have terrible spatial awareness. The idea of things being in different places at different altitudes, at different speeds, converging at one another terrifies me. Like I don't, that's not what I do. But there are over 300,000 men and women in this country who are certified air traffic controllers, and they create orderly flow, not just in normal circumstances, but in terrible weather with emergencies. They're the ones keeping us all from running into each other up there. Awesome job. If you like math and science, especially math, like if trig and calculus are your jam, air traffic control is probably the right job for you. Great benefits, awesome opportunities to advance and promote, and it can very easily be a lifelong career for you if it's something that you wanted to do. Aviation maintenance. Everybody sees, Delta, Southwest, American flying around, and well, yes, surely somebody takes care of that airplane. Yes, somebody does take care of that airplane. Hundreds of thousands of people take care of those airplanes, but it's not just commercial aviation. You've got corporate, like what I did, very specialized niche operations. There are companies that specialize in taking transport category airplanes, with bunches of seats in them. They take all of that stuff out and they rehab it to be a business jet. So imagine a super rich person like Josh who could afford his own 737, right, and have me fly it for him, because Josh can't fly it, but I would fly it for him. And so in the back, you've got a living room, a movie theater. What do you want, a pool, Josh? Do you want a pool? We'll put a pool in there too. There are companies that do this. You know what you have to work at those companies? An airframe and power plant mechanic certificate.
Yeah, I'm in Pensacola, Florida right now, and there is a huge, it's called an MRO, Maintenance and Repair Organization, I think, that is expanding like crazy here, and they have contracts to do overhauls and hot sections and large maintenance events for airlines and UPS, FedEx, and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when you think a Delta jet, it's not just the mechanics that work for Delta. When that jet hits a certain period, it comes off the line for a month or so, and it goes to one of these MROs, and they're giant organizations that do really specialized work. And so some of those people will have an A&P mechanic, but they become real craftsmen and specialists at, like the sheet metal on 737 700 series or whatever is their thing, and that's what they do. And there may be only 50 people in the country or in the world that really know how to do that really well, and those people are paid well for that skill.
Right, exactly. But that's just fixing airplanes. What about Boeing and Airbus that make these airplanes? Now, here's a cool thing. You don't have to have an airframe and power plant mechanic certificate to work in manufacturing. Now, There are several people in those organizations that do hold A&P certificates because those airplanes are on production, right? They have to fly. So you have to be maintained by somebody who actually has the A&P certificate. But to work in manufacturing for Embraer, Embraer is a huge manufacturer with a big facility here in Florida, where I always am, and Josh is temporarily squatting in my state. Go back to Texas. But anyway, so these facilities are all over the place. Also, not to overly wave the flag or anything, but Josh, I'm told that you folks build things too.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, and when you expand it beyond just the manufacturing of airplanes, I mean, there's a whole ecosystem of equipment that goes into aviation equipment, software. I mean, one of the biggest, like, we build flight simulators. Sure, we also make software, and then there's companies like Garmin who build avionics. And I know for a fact that Garmin specifically employs pilot software developers. So people that get their pilot's license and then go on and are also highly skilled software developers to write code for their avionics, because it's such a specific environment and there's so much that goes into thinking about what information is presented to the pilot in what situation and when and what format. And I mean, that's a whole another range. And so, I mean, and that's, for me personally, that was kind of when I went into aviation thinking that I would be a pilot of some type. It was going to be a fly fishing guide / pilot, but then I got married and, life. So after that,
There's
the
still
idea,
hope for your kids though, Josh.
yeah, being in a technology business, which Redbird is, was really exciting to me. And I like the fact that it's aviation related. I get to talk about aviation. I get to go fly. I get to go to aviation events. But on a day-to-day basis, my job looks a lot more like a marketing manager for a technology company than it does a marketing manager for an airline. So it's, there's a whole range of stuff that's available, even beyond the big categories: pilot, mechanic, air traffic controller. It's a huge industry with a lot of opportunity.
Well, just in the business side, you just mentioned that, right? So if you have a love for marketing, but you like airplanes,
Right.
well, we do sell things in aviation. If you're like a numbers person, you love financial accounting, but you also love airplanes, we do that too. A lot of it actually,
Yeah.
because it takes a lot of those numbers to make airplanes work and make money.
And what's really interesting is, like, so my job is vice president of marketing, but I couldn't do my job if I wasn't also a flight instructor.
Right.
Because of my industry, because of the product that we're selling it into, it really helps almost require that I'm a CFI, and that I can talk to other flight instructors like Eric and speak the same lingo, and I understand the problems that my customers are having because I have also had them as a flight instructor, and I think that goes a long way. So when we say you're just in the industry, it doesn't mean that you're not actively participating in the aviation aspect of the aviation industry. I think Redbird, as an example, not to wave the flag again, but one of the things we really value, the idea that we have pilots on staff, so much so that we pay for initial pilot training. If you've worked for Redbird for a year, we'll get you your pilot's license, and then every year every Redbird employee gets a stipend to fly a certain amount to stay current, because it's really important to, like, the quality of the product that we build and the level of service that we have, the interactions we have with our customers, that they understand aviation. And so we value it, and a lot of companies are that way. I know ForeFlight, I think, has a program like that, AOPA, and that's just in general aviation.
Right. Exactly. Anyway, well, so that should be enough about careers to wet your whistle. I mean, we're going to talk more when we get to Q&A. So let's move into how you get to the career. Let's talk about education and training for a second. So many different pathways. We talked about this a little bit for the pilot side in the last webinar we did about becoming a pilot, because I don't know, Josh pretty much did the home instruction thing for a while and then went on and so point being, I've worked with a lot of different flight instructors. I've worked in Part 61, very informal, an instructor in an airplane at your local FBO, at your local airport. I've worked in structured collegiate programs and like structured flight schools. There's so many different avenues on the pilot side to get there, not to mention the fact that if it's your desire to serve our country anyway, the military is a great option, and because flight training is free. Now, people who have who go into, and I tell people, because they come to me and they're like, well, I'm gonna join the Air Force because I'm gonna be a pilot. Okay, that's fine, but understand that you don't get to pick your job, right? It's picked for you. So you might not necessarily be a pilot. So you have to, if you want to do the military thing, my encouragement to everybody is you have to have a desire to serve first, right? That your primary desire is to serve the country in the military. If that's the case, then it won't matter to you if you don't get your first choice in job, or you don't make it through flight school, or you do really well in flight school and they send you to fly drones instead of airplanes, right? So you have to have a desire to serve first, and then there's the military option. Okay, so that's there too. So there's just the point being, the pilot training funnel has such a huge opening. There's so many ways in, and you don't have to pick one path and that be the only path you ever take. For example, 20% of my students are veterans. They came from the military. They were not pilots in the military. Maybe they served as crew chiefs. They served in various different functions. And after separating from the military, they're using their post 9/11 GI Bill to fund flight training. I talked to a lot of crew chiefs actually who worked on aircraft in the military and said, I fixed airplanes for how many ever years. Now it's my turn to fly them. So it's not like you have to pick one path and that's the only path you can ever have. When it comes to maintenance, there are two very specific paths for maintenance training. Makes it a little bit easier. Under Part 65, you can become a mechanic through an apprenticeship program. It's one of the few jobs that still exist where you can apprentice for a job, but you actually do training and time with another mechanic. That time's logged, and then you can test for your aircraft and power plant certificate. It obviously takes a little while because you have to build up the requisite number of hours to do that. Your other option is a Part 147 maintenance school, which is what it sounds like. It's a very structured program, usually a lot smaller training footprint, 12 to 18 months or so, to go through from what's a wrench to airframe and power plant mechanic. The cool thing about those programs, at least the ones that we work with commonly, most of those students already have a job before they even take their certification exam, because the demand is so great that most of them already have a job contingent upon them actually passing the FA test when they get out. So it's an awesome opportunity there. And then, like Josh said, you can go to business school and get a degree in marketing. And while you're in school, go out to your local airport and learn to fly, get your pilot certificate. And so there's so many ways into the business side of aviation that we would need like a whole webinar series to even scratch the surface of that. But that's my point. It's not one and done. Like, well, I've spent 3 years in business school. I guess I could start all over again. Don't start. Finish your degree. That's fine. Finish your degree, and then find a college program like Polk State or another. We'll be glad to take credit for what you've already got. I'm not going to make you take humanities again. We're not going to make you take history and math again. You've already taken those courses. We'll articulate that credit. And so you come in and you do a degree in flight training, basically, or maintenance training, or whatever the case may be. So it's not a well, I can't change my mind now. You can, but there's nothing wrong with having a double whammy kind of degree, right? Get a business degree and an aviation degree. Knock yourself out. Maximize the financial aid opportunities you have available to you in collegiate learning. Go there, man. Pursue all the different, again, Josh and I, and I'm going to speak for him because I know it's true, Josh and I would never be here talking to you now if we stayed on the path we started on.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I've made so many zigzags along that way. I'm in a job now I didn't even know existed. Did you know this job with Redbird didn't exist when you started flight training?
They didn't.
But so no, I mean, we're here because we were open to opportunities. We found our place. We asked a lot of questions, like how do I, what should I do next? And that is the angle. When it comes to getting to your career, it's just don't stop asking questions. Let's talk about Outlook, Josh, and then we'll open it up for questions. So you can't do a career in aviation talk and not talk about the outlook for jobs, right? I mean, that I said most people start there. I don't start there. I end there. So, and everybody's wondering right now, particularly at the time we're doing this webinar, we're in the throes of the coronavirus, and what impact is that going to have on global aviation for months, years? Everybody's asking that question, trying to figure it out. Really interesting articles coming out, and not from Aviation Press, but from Forbes and Business Insider and AMT Online and other sources, saying that actually, if anything, the coronavirus has made worse the maintenance demand. That we were already in a maintenance shortfall, and everybody talks about, is there a pilot shortage? Yes, there is. How bad is it? It was pretty bad. Nobody was actually talking about the fact that the maintenance shortage globally was worse than the pilot shortage, like drastically so. So much so that at a maybe a year or so ago, Delta would have paid you a really sweet bonus if you were willing to relocate to Honolulu, Hawaii, and work on airplanes. Because apparently nobody wants to live in Hawaii and work on airplanes. Here's the thing: when a plane breaks in Hawaii, it stays in Hawaii. It has to be fixed before it can leave Hawaii. So that is a global need everywhere. And actually, the coronavirus has made the maintenance shortage even worse. So I know nobody was chomping at the bit to become an aviation maintenance technician, but that need was already bad and is now even worse because a lot of maintenance training programs had to stop operations because of social distancing. I mean, you got 30 people in a hangar working on an engine together. You can't be 6 feet away from each other. So, a lot of maintenance programs went to reduce demand or shut down for some period of time. Well, that stopped the funnel of people coming into the business. So it actually globally has made the situation a little bit worse. On the pilot side, I mean, yes, no one's hiring right now. At the time we're talking about this, if you're watching this 2 years from now, write me and tell me how great things got later. But right now, there aren't new hiring classes. However, what's also happened in pilot training is that a lot of pilot training slowed down. A lot of pilot training stopped. And so the same spigot was closed for us too. And so as we look at what's coming, we got to talk first about what was going on before we got into the coronavirus. Depending on which study you look at, somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 maintenance and pilot technicians needed globally. That's Boeing's study. Every year when Boeing publishes the pilot and technician outlook, the demand just keeps getting more and more because global air travel has increased so much over the last few years. New production is up. And now we look at, where are we at right now? Where are we going to be? Here's the cool thing about being a pilot or mechanic. Nobody starts flight training or maintenance training today and is certified to do it tomorrow. Okay, it takes years to get to a place where you're ready for that job. So for those of you that are like, say what?
That's quite the spin. That's the
Well,
cool
no,
thing. It takes years.
Well, it just does, right? I mean, it's not something. It's medical school takes 8, 4 undergrad and 4 graduate years. And it's not like it's something that just happens overnight. So for people who are looking at going, well, I don't know, I shouldn't start flight training because that Delta's not hiring right now. Well, Delta's going to be hiring in 2 years from now. I mean, when we look at cycles in aviation, we look big picture. We look decades into the future. That's what Boeing does because that's how you have to forecast demand. So don't freak out because things are rough right now. And if you're in that place where you're job searching right now and trying to figure out what's going to happen next, you may be like I was after 9/11. The airlines weren't hiring anybody. Hiring stopped. Well, what are you going to? Well, I guess I'll try this corporate thing. I fell in love with it. I would have gone to an airline just like all my other friends did. I would have gone and done the thing. I would have gotten furloughed just like they did, but I didn't. I went into corporate aviation, and man, we were super busy. We were flying like crazy. I went the first year I was my first year as a corporate pilot. I logged 1,200 hours. I flew all the time, and I made way better money than I would have made as an airline pilot at the time too. So don't lose hope. Don't have despair. We've been through these cycles before. We were there after 9/11. We were there in 2008 for a little while. It's the way this industry works. It's not a reason not to do it. It's a reason to jump in now, because by the time you're done, that's when the greatest need is going to occur. This is why we're in such a pilot shortage, because after 9/11, people stopped flight training. Then in 2008, people stopped flight training. Well, now 15% of Americans' pilot population is set to retire within the next 2 decades. That's 15% of turnover of your most senior pilots. Where are those people going to come from? Well, hopefully you guys. Okay, that's enough. Let's entertain
And
question.
I'm gonna actually add just a little bit else on there. There's we've talked about mostly the manned aviation side, the
Yeah.
pilots, the maintenance. There is it's very few forward looking, but there is potentially a huge need for unmanned aviation jobs, maintenance jobs, management jobs, programming jobs, potentially ground-based operation. And then there's a whole new category that the industry is still trying to figure out of what does a supervisor, a manned supervisor of a autonomous
Autonomous
aircraft
vehicle.
look
Yeah.
like? What does that job look like? What kind of skill sets do they have? And it's more than a pilot, less than a driver's license, probably, or excuse me, less than a pilot, more than a driver's license. And so there's a whole range of opportunity that's still coming up. And if you were a ambitious person who was interested in the future and not sure exactly where to go, I might point you in that space, because there will be a lot of opportunity there. You may have heard Joey's name mentioned. Joey's on the call. She's helping manage some of the questions for us, and she's a huge believer in it. And we have a bet about being able to fly an autonomous drone from Dallas to a suburb at some suburb. And I'm on the pessimistic side in the short term, but in the long term, I think it's going to be a place where there's going to be a lot of investment, a lot of jobs, and a lot of growth. So it's another thing we should probably mention in there. But with that said, Eric, I think we're turning it over to questions. Yeah.
Yeah, let's go to Q&A. Let's discuss with the webinar participants.
Yes. So anyone have any questions? Go ahead and type them in. It doesn't look like anyone's put any questions in yet, but there's bound to be some. Any questions? Questions. Okay, I got a question for you, Eric.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
How do I get these boyish good looks? Well,
yeah.
Lots of coffee.
So your job, where you're managing a flight school, that kind of, you don't travel much. I mean, you travel for conferences, but not like an airline travels.
Right.
And it's probably a pretty nice lifestyle. What kind of career path do people have to take to get a job like that?
Okay, so that's a great question. So first of all, again, did not know this job existed. I had no idea. I mean, I knew people did this, but I didn't know it was a job you could get. That you like somebody had to like get you and make you a collegiate aerospace program director. Hilariously enough, my journey to this position, I got this job, or even found out this job existed specifically because of a friend I had from some consulting projects I had done in the past. I didn't know that Polk State existed. I didn't know what Polk State was at the time. I was running the aviation content department for Glenn Publications in Gainesville, a pilot training company, building online courses and doing really cool stuff. But it's how I met the Redbird guys. We all got started in simulation stuff at about the same time. And so I had done some consulting work outside of that job, just on my, because again, entrepreneur, third generation entrepreneur. I've always done some thing for myself too, in addition to whatever my day job was. And found out that this new program was getting created. And actually my friend had been contracted to build the curriculum. She shared it with me, and I fell in love with it. It was exactly what I wanted, because I had said, after I went through college, I said, if I could ever find a way to do this, maybe when I'm like 60 or 70 or whatever, and my career's over and I've done everything, it would be super awesome to run a college program, because my experience in college was so great. And it shaped so much of what I know about aviation. I had so many great mentors because of that experience. And so ultimately, I'd already sort of moved into full-time training. I think part of it was because of my prior experience in collegiate aviation, and in the training industry, and with an industry footprint in corporate aviation as well. I checked several different boxes. I wasn't just one-sided. And I think if you want to work in collegiate aviation or in training, the best thing you can do is be multifaceted. Having multiple opportunities, multiple different experience points is helpful, essential, because your students are going to come to you and ask you questions about air traffic control. Well, I've never been an air traffic controller, but I have a lot of friends who are air traffic controllers. And so it's very easy for me to forward people and say, hey, will you talk to this person? They come to me and they're like, aerospace engineering sounds really cool. Well, I thought I was going to be an aerospace engineer until I took calculus. And I was like, I'm going to pass this class, but I'm never taking another one. That was not for me. I mean, I passed. We're not going to talk about that, but I passed, and that was fine. So pilot it is. But I know I have 2 aerospace engineers who teach in my program, and so I can say, hey, can you help me mentor this person? And I think that's the key. It's having that multifaceted experience, just like you were saying, Josh. I mean, you couldn't do your job if you weren't a pilot and you weren't a flight instructor. But you also have to, I mean, I would assume, to be the VP of marketing, you should probably also know something about marketing as well.
Sure, probably.
So it really does require multiple different facets of experience.
Yeah, okay. We got a bunch of questions now, so thanks everybody. This should keep us nice and busy. So, Eric, can you compare, contrast corporate flying career pay and benefits with commercial career flying benefit or pay and benefits?
Common question and a very good one. Okay, so in corporate aviation, you're on call in most operations. And so you fly when the company needs to fly. So when we talk about corporate, there's really there's a lot of granularity there, but there's the corporate operation where you contract your service to other companies. Okay, so I have the fleet of airplanes, your company contracts with me, and I carry your people, right? And then there's the other version where I am the company. Like Coca-Cola has its own corporate fleet of aircraft, and it manages them inside of Coca-Cola, for example. Okay, so you can work inside a company or you can work in a contract company. In either regard, because it's non-scheduled air travel, you fly when people want to fly. That's the whole reason people choose corporate. You don't have to wait for the airline. You don't have to wait for a time that works for you, and you can go to any airport you want to. You don't just have to go to major airports. So you fly when you're needed. So you have to have a much more flexible schedule. Be willing to fly like that. Now, I will say, when you get into a corporate flight department, big corporate flight departments, you have a schedule. It might be 7 days on, 7 days off, or something like that. Where at an airline, you're going to fly a line. And so, well, at first you're going to be on reserve. They'll call you when they need you. But once you have enough seniority to bid for a line, you'll fly that line on that schedule. So you may be on for 4 days and off for 3 days and on for 4 days, or you may be super senior one day and you fly to Hong Kong twice a month, and that's it. That's your whole flight schedule. And so in that regard, there are some similarities and differences. When it comes to pay, generally speaking, in corporate aviation, starting pay is higher, but the top pay is lower. So at an airline, you'll start at a lower pay scale, And because virtually almost all airline flying these days is union regulated, so there's a published pay scale. You can go online right now and find out what an 18-year Delta first officer makes. Like that's available information. It's on the internet. And with each year of seniority, you get a scheduled pay increase. And then when you move from the right seat to the left seat, you go back to the bottom of that list and you work your way back up again. Most of those pay tables work in 20-year increments. So you can see really what you're going to make for your entire flying career. And then when you change airlines, you go back to the bottom and you work your way back up again. And so every time you switch seats or you go to a different airline or different airplane, you go back to the bottom of that seniority list. Where in corporate, generally speaking, the pay is much more even keel. And there is some of that, there's some pay differences, but generally your starting pay is higher, but your ending pay is lower than you're going to see in the airlines. Is that adequate? Did I cover that?
Yeah, I think that's good. And this is a somewhat sarcastic way to explain it, but the difference, airline pilots drive a bus, corporate pilots drive a limo, and Part 135 charter pilots drive an Uber. So like, you know, I mean, obviously you're flying, you're not driving, but like kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. Now
You're doing a lot of managing actually at that level.
Yeah.
You're managing the airplane and yeah,
Right.
you take off, you land, you go to the
So
really
I'm
cool
gonna handle this one real
hotel. Yeah.
quick. Should you have to be a mechanic to build your own airplane? No. If you want to build your own airplane, that's an experimental. You can buy that kit. You can go online right now and buy yourself a kit that'll show up in a bunch of big boxes, and you put it in your garage and you start building it. You do not have to be a mechanic, but you cannot take money from anybody to fly in that airplane. Okay, so fractional corporate flying, what is that like? What is a fractional corporate program?
Okay, so fractional is for those of you that are familiar with like the timeshare concept. So instead of buying a condo on the beach, which is maybe too expensive for my budget, I can buy a share of one, right? Like I can buy a fourth of a condo and share it with other people, and my input is lower, right? And then I have to share when I use it. So fractional is the same way. I buy a piece of an airplane, and then I have a certain number of hours that I can use throughout the year, and then I pay a smaller chunk than I would if I owned the plane outright to use the aircraft effectively. So it's a form of ownership where instead of owning an entire airplane and having all the expenses on yourself, you share those expenses with the other fractional owners.
Yeah, and from a pilot's perspective, you know, like big fractional operators or somebody like NetJet or FlexJet, those are companies you may have heard of. And from a pilot's perspective, it's kind of a mix between corporate aviation and airline aviation. So they have those jobs are union jobs as well. They they have pay scales. I don't know if they're public or not, but they do have pay scales based on seniority, routes that are bid based on senior, or at least scheduling that's bid based on seniority. But they have more the routes that you know what an individual day's flight looks like is way more flexible than what it would be for an airline pilot. So it's kind of a mix between the two. Okay, so next question is, okay, so this might be in your wheelhouse. How can I become a flight instructor in the US if I'm not an American citizen, I assume?
Okay, so first of all, let's assume that you already have some kind of pilot certificate. The first thing you have to do is convert whatever foreign certificate you have to an equivalent US certificate. There's a whole process to do that. It's not terribly complicated, but you have to get an FAA pilot certificate first. If you do not currently have any certification whatsoever as a pilot, you go to flight school, whatever form that takes. And if you are not a US citizen, then you'll need a training visa to do that. If you go to a college program or a professional flight academy, you're looking at an M1 or an F1 visa. Now, there are options where you can go to an accelerated flight training program where like 2 to 3 weeks, you can get your private pilot certificate, okay? That's a different kind of flying, but that option exists as well. And so the process to get to flight instructor in that regard is the same as what we go through if we are US citizens. You have to get through TSA background check, first of all, as a non-US citizen. pretty simple, but it takes 4 to 6 weeks to process that. Once that's done, you go through the whole flight training process. You get your flight instructor certificate the same way that a U.S. citizen does, and then you need to work for a company that's willing to sponsor you on a work visa if you're not a U.S. citizen. In the same way that any job works, you're perfectly able to do that. You just have to find a company that can sponsor you on a work visa.
Yep. Okay, so will there be a salary changes with reduced pilot demand after all of this?
Well, the cool thing about the airlines, like we said before, those pilot contracts are union contracts. So when you go to work for the airline, you go to work on a contract. Now they are revised periodically, but the airline can't just change your pay. So they can furlough people, they can reduce their workload or their staff if they choose to, but they can't just decide to change your pay. So, for airlines who are currently in contract negotiations, I would assume that this would probably play into that. But that's what union representation is for pilots. They make the argument that, well, yes, but doing the job is still the same level of complexity, whether we do it a lot or we do it less. And so that's the negotiation process that takes place in a unionized workforce. You're not involved in that as a pilot. I mean, you can vote, when you're asked questions, but ultimately the union does that negotiation for you. When we're looking at corporate aviation, a lot of that is contract based as well. My corporate flying, I was not a contractor. I was a normal, regular employee. And our pay wasn't set by contract, but it was agreed to at onset. So if the company had come to me and said, hey, Eric, listen, flying slowed down a little bit, we got to cut your pay, I could choose to either accept that or just say, thanks for the opportunity. It was fun. I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah, and I would say, I would add on to that, kind of early to tell exactly what, I mean, this is a little more very specific to this situation, but there have not been a ton of furloughs, primarily because the U.S. Congress passed the CARES Act that gave the airlines a bunch of money as long as they didn't let anybody go. So we're going to come up relatively soon on the expiration of the CARES Act, of that window that they have. I think it's in September, is when that expires. And depending on where the economy is and the demand, the airlines may furlough then, or if there's another congressional act or who knows what. And so there's a lot that could happen there. And it's probably too early to say exactly what's going to happen in the midterm with pilot demand. In the long term, I think the fundamentals are still in place, and Eric mentioned this, the fundamentals are still in place that there will be demand for pilots 2, 3, 5, 10 years from now. 6 months to 18 months from now, it's a little more murky because you kind of, it depends on.
We've never had this one before. Yeah, that's the thing.
Exactly.
With each downturn, they're all uniquely different. We've been through several of them, but this is the first one we've had that's been a global pandemic, right? So the industry doesn't know how to even forecast for it because it's not something we've seen before.
Yeah. All right, so let's go on to our next question. Can you contrast the pilot, the 2-year programs with the 4-year programs, and getting a degree first and then going to ATP or another flight school like that?
Yeah, sure. So again, when it comes to like professional pilot training, there are a lot of different flavors there too. So first of all, we'll start with the academies. Academies are accelerated training programs, usually a 12 to 18-month footprint, where you go from what is an airplane to a flight instructor very quickly. In almost all of those programs, you go in knowing you're going to work there as a flight instructor. You build time as a flight instructor, and then a lot of those academies have pathway programs with regional airlines where you go to work. So that's the pathway. Interestingly, to be a regional airline pilot, I don't know of any regional airline in the United States that requires a degree, a collegiate degree, to be an airline pilot at a regional air carrier. However, almost all major airlines either require or have preferential hiring based on college degrees. So what ends up happening, it's a much quicker path to a regional airline, but then pilots find themselves at a regional for a longer period of time, waiting for their opportunity to upgrade to their major airline partner because they don't have the collegiate degree in place. So it's a trade-off. You get there faster, but then while you're working and doing your airline thing, you got to find a way to do school online because you're flying at weird times. So there's that. In the collegiate pathway, you have 2-year and 4-year programs. Polk is unique in that we offer both 2 and 4-year degrees. It's not a normal thing, but it is something that we do. And so our 2-year degree is this, what is an airplane to commercial pilot, flight instructor in 2 years. So a little longer footprint than the academy, but it comes with an associate's degree. With our bachelor's degree, once you've completed the 2-year program, then you effectively complete the rest of your education online. So the entire bachelor's degree is done online. You can do it, while you're working as a flight instructor to build your flight time. The point is, rather than already being an airline pilot and trying to figure out how to do school, you get all 4 years done before the airline thing happens, right? So the collegiate degree is already done. All your flight time is done. So the footprint is longer, but you've checked both of the boxes.
Yeah.
So honestly, I can't tell you that one's better than the other. Obviously, I like collegiate aviation, or I would be doing something else. So I mean, I have a bias. It's the way I went through training. I like it because it's well-rounded. It's less fire hose of aviation, more understanding, retention, and promotion of that. But honestly, they're all an accessible pathway to a career as a pilot. It's just sort of what are you into, and if your goal is to maximize the amount of federal funding you can get in financial aid, you need to go to a public school, a college or university, because you're going to be able to get far more financial aid in those kinds of opportunities. If you're just interested in getting it done as quickly as possible, the academy pathway might be advantageous to you as well.
Yeah, so just as a point of reference, I did went to school at a non-aviation school for a non-aviation degree and did flight training on the side at a Part 61 school. And it just fit what I thought my career path was going to be, and better, because I never really had intentions of being an airline pilot. And so I wanted to have a degree in another thing that I could use in a career outside of aviation, the aviation industry.
And just look at him now, folks.
Look at me now. All right, so I'll answer this one real quick. What does it take to be a cargo pilot? A cargo pilot is just another type of Part 121 or 135 pilot. So the same thing you'd need to be an airline pilot or a charter pilot is what you need to be a cargo pilot. It's just really.
And you have to like being up at night, because all your flying is going to be in the middle of the night.
Right. In a lot of ways, the FAA does it doesn't really matter whether you're flying people or boxes in the back, as far as a lot of the qualifications go for a lot of operations. So, okay, I'll take this one as well. Can you advise on equipment and software for low-cost entry home simulator to practice ahead of flight time? Yes, I can. There's a webinar on our website right now, landing.redbirdflight.com/webinars. It'll be a home simulation. Click on that. It's an hour long, goes into great depth about it. But there's lots of options. The main thing is just get something that you can use right now to get started, and then upgrade as you can. Okay, this will be the last question. We're running a little low on time, and I got a meeting in 20 minutes. So from this perspective, how do high school aviation CTE programs help students shorten the aviation pipeline? That's you, buddy.
You're asking me.
Yeah.
See, we need to have who's flying the airplane. I have the flight controls. Yeah. Okay. I have the flight controls. So that's such a great question. When I was in high school, I had no guidance at all about aviation. I thought I was going to be an engineer, and then I took math. And so no one in my school knew anything about being a commercial airline pilot or anything like that, and I had to go find a mentor outside. The huge benefit to high school CTE programs that now exist all over the country, which I think is amazing, and we need more of them, but it's awesome that we have them, is that there's now this repository of information for young people who want to do this for a living that I didn't even know existed. And so my number one encouragement for those in the high school area is to connect with those industry mentors, whether it's with local colleges and universities who have aviation programs. They'll absolutely hook you up with folks. Almost every CT program I know of is required by their district or state laws to have an industry-based advisory board. You probably already have those connections, or you know people who can't. That is the most important thing, is seeing, as a high school student, for me, to have seen someone come into the classroom or do a live meeting or whatever who did that job, to tell me, to explain to me what it was. I don't hear it from my teacher. I don't listen to my teacher. I want to hear it from somebody who does this for a living, who can tell me what the job is really like, and that I can see, oh, this is somebody from my hometown, or this is somebody, that, like, I can do this, right? That's the first most important thing that we need. And beyond that, it's curriculum alignment. To the extent that you can opt into, AOPA's high school curriculum is free. There are some requirements to use it, but it doesn't cost districts anything. That's a great starting point. It's a standard curriculum. It's aligned to next generation science standards. This is good stuff, right? So the more that we can standardize and align curriculum to career pathways, and again, that's where those connections with local colleges and universities come in, because like I love working with high school programs to align our curriculum so that we can do articulated credit. Like if you take private pilot ground school in high school, I'm going to give you 3 college credits for that if you passed it. If you took the private pilot knowledge test and passed it in high school, you got 3 free college credits waiting on you. And we can do more than that. Like I can share our curriculum. I've done that with multiple schools. The more that we have a standardized pathway that connects from aviation is kind of cool to I want to do aviation as a job, the better off we are. But I think that positive mentorship and guidance is chief number one goal. And then after that, it's good curriculum aligned to industry needs and what they're going to do next, because no one's going to leave high school and go to work for Delta. Like there's a gap in the middle. So if you can help that kid see how to get from here to the end of that gap and create a pathway for that, that's how we do it.
All right, great. Well, I think that'll probably wrap up our time. I appreciate Eric. I appreciate you being on the webinar today, and thanks for everybody who was here. If you have any more questions, any feedback, send an email to info@redbirdflight.com and we'll get in touch. Thanks again. Take care.